Hello Internet, we are talking about third degree silicone, which is a 2-part silicone compound. There are some other videos kind of talking about third degree silicone, but I wanted to show you just some basics about it and what you can do with it besides just a basic open wound. If you've never used third degree silicone before, it is a very quickly curing 2-part silicone compound that you can use to make wounds directly out of kit. It's really handy if you don't have time to make prosthetics kind of the proper way and you just really need a quick kind of shallow wound. I'll show you an example of kind of what it's typically used for, which is open wounds. Here we have part A and part B. You can get third degree silicone in a bunch of different colors if you want to try to have it match to your skin almost immediately a bit better. I decided to try to get as clear as I could because what you can actually do is you can mix foundation, you can mix powder pigment and all else into the silicone to get it the right color that you want. There are some things that will prevent this from curing, including latex, so if you're using third degree silicone, don't use latex gloves. You can't put it anywhere near like a latex bald cap because it will prevent it from curing and it's just gonna stay this sticky, gooey gel. And we have a dirt ball ready. Here I mixed my silicone with some of my foundation because I want it to match my skin color better. I ended up putting way too much foundation in for the amount of silicone that I was using, and that ended up making my edge very apparent. But this is just kind of an example of how you can mix foundation into your third degree. So you want equal parts A and B. Don't allow them to touch until you are ready to mix them. It's recommended that you use different tools to remove parts A and part B from their containers. You cannot double dip because if you dunk it into jar A and then without cleaning the utensil or without using a different tool, you dunk it into jar B will begin to cure. I did something pretty dang stupid a while ago where I mixed up the jar lids for part A and part B, and now at the very top of the jars there is cured silicone, and there is obviously no turning back from that. I still get little chunks in there. Depending on how warm your skin is, it could take 5 to 10 minutes to completely cure. Third degree silicone as it cures kind of goes throughout these different stages where it's best to do different things with it. So initially, like when you first mix it together, it's kind of like this gel. It's kind of like, I don't know, like hair gel sorta. But the next stage that it's going to get into is it actually gets a bit softer and, dare I say, runny? Maybe not runny, but it's definitely more drippy and goopy. So once you have it mixed, you want to have kind of a basic shape, like you have the basic area on your arm. I'm using my arm. I made sure to clean off my arm with 99% alcohol because as a general rule, you want anywhere that you're putting your third degree silicone or any prosthetics to be as clean as possible. If you're planning on having third degree on for a long period of time, you're going to want to put an adhesive underneath before putting on the third degree. And exactly how much I borked with the coloring is going to become very apparent as the stuff begins to set. If I had a stippling sponge, then when this starts to cure a little bit more, what a lot of people do is they take a stippling sponge with a little bit of alcohol, and any tools that you use, like a brush maybe to smooth down the edges, you're going to want to put some 99% isopropyl alcohol. You could also use 91%. I have used 91% with no problem because the alcohol will prevent the silicone from sticking to a brush or any other tools. Definitely, if you do use a brush when you're trying to smooth down the edges of silicone, make sure it is a brush that you do not care about because there is the chance of it getting into the bristles. So you kind of have to form and reform the cut a little bit and just kind of mess with it as it's curing because the edges are going to melt and start, smoothing themselves out right before it kind of gets to more of a structured and more of a firm stage. Also remember, whenever you're doing open cuts, that really no cut is just flat on the bottom, so you might want to leave a little bit of silicone on the bottom of your wound just for a bit of texture. This is about the stage where you would probably go in with a stippling sponge and you would take it to the edges, or you'd use a brush with 99% alcohol and you would try to smooth it into your skin better to make the edge less noticeable. Be careful using something like 99% alcohol on the edges too much, especially if you don't have an adhesive on the bottom of the silicone because the edges will raise up, especially if you put the silicone in an area where there's a lot of motion and it's likely to peel up all the edges. I used a torn up makeup sponge with just kind of a rough bottom, and I went in with stuff like coral adjuster, a little bit of vein tone, olive adjuster, rose adjuster, to try to match it to my skin a little bit better. But I really kind of screwed myself adding way too much foundation to start. See, I colored the inside, I added some redness around the wound for fake irritation, and I added some fake blur. And this is the kind of thing that people typically use third-degree silicone for, is just kind of some shallow wounds. You could also put KY jelly on the bottom of your wound if you need it to stay wet looking longer and it makes it look really gooey. It can look really cool and really creepy. A lot of fake bloods start to beat up on silicone, and I've actually seen some people do stuff like put liquid latex or stuff on the bottom for additional texture and stuff that the fake blood might grip onto a bit better, because silicone kind of makes fake blood beat up just a touch. To remove third-degree silicone, I use isopropyl myrostate. I will put a link in the description for where I bought it. I believe I actually got it off of Amazon. It's really gentle. It's basically like, I've heard people compare it to like really concentrated coconut oil almost. Stuff like this oil is kind of your best friend when you're removing stuff like this, because it will really just kind of get rid of any grip. I go in with a brush that I don't care too much about. I dunk it into the isopropyl myrostate, and I just rub it along the edges of where it's really attached to my skin, and it comes right off. Isopropyl myrostate is probably the gentlest way I have found of removing stuff like this. Now on to a few other things that I have used silicone for besides just open wounds. I've also used it to make kind of fake gills on my arm before. You really just need a small amount of it. You lay down kind of a flat layer, and then I go in with a metal spatula and I just kind of like carve in really lightly where the gills are going to be. This is another case where paying attention to the different stages that the silicone is in is really important, because you're not really going to be able to have gills that have like the lift of gills until it's really in that state where you can sculpt it a bit better. So when it's kind of like that runny, really jelly-like stage is when I make like kind of the place, like the initial cuts where the gills are going to go, and then you kind of have to wait it out a little bit. Since I didn't have a stimpling sponge, I tore up a makeup sponge and I dunked it in 99% alcohol to try to take care of those edges a little bit. I ended up being pretty happy with how this turned out, but definitely a stippling sponge would have been better. I always have a baby wipe nearby to kind of take care of like all the little bits of silicone that end up sticking to my tool. When I really got stuff going with the gills, I was actually dunking my metal spatula into 99% alcohol to prevent the silicone from sticking to my tool. Once it was set, I used Maron translucent setting powder to try to get rid of the shine a little bit. I used Vein Tone from the Skin Illustrator palette. I used Cedar Brown to try to add some more depth, and I used gray and white eyeshadows for highlighting and shading. And there you have some nice easy gills. Something else really easy and quick you can use it for is just things that are wrong with your hands, like bumps or blisters. In small amounts, especially if you put an adhesive down beforehand, these can actually have some good staying power. I mixed up a little bit of the silicone and I used the end of a brush pick, the pointy end, to apply it in small drops all over my hand. Once it was set, which was pretty dang quick because it is small amounts and my hand was warm and your body heat can help it cure faster, I just used some watered down Rose Adjuster from the Skin Illustrator palette, and I made the bases look like they were like red and a little bit irritated. At first I coated the tops with Rose Adjuster, and then once I had the base nice and red, I used alcohol to wipe away a little bit of the Rose Adjuster on top so it really looked like a blister that was bulging out a little bit. And that's another really nice and quick and easy one. The last thing I'm going to show you that I used this for was actually something that I did on a live stream on Mixer.com. And I actually used third-degree silicone to make a prosthetic. Originally it was supposed to be for Angelina Jolie lips, and it ended up being a mustache, which is what this is here. I used Maron Paradise paints to paint this thing, but that mustache right there is actually third-degree silicone that I mixed up and I put into a mold, and actually put it into a gelatin mold. I hope this was a good rundown of third-degree silicone for you. I'll put links down below where I got my third-degree silicone, where I got my isopropyl myrostate, where I got my Skin Illustrator palette. I hope this might have given you some ideas as well for what you can do with third-degree silicone, just, you know, besides using it for open wounds. You can get really creative with it. If you want to continue to learn about special effects makeup, or you watch three men play a lot of video games, you should subscribe to this channel. Whatever day it is that you're seeing this, I hope you're having a good one, and I will see you the next time I do video stuff.